Hello. A talk on fun. That should be fun, shouldn't it? Oh dear, I'll apologise in advance. Right, so my name's Ben, and I work at the University of Sussex. This talk is really an attempt to get people to think about fun more seriously. And whilst that may appear to be like a contradiction in terms, to think about fun seriously, I think it's something that's kind of universally acknowledged that having fun is a good thing. Having fun in your life is a good thing. And if you imagine a life with no fun in it, that's a bad thing. So the idea that makes this worthy of study is that if the absence of fun is so bad, then the presence of fun is good and therefore important. From this starting point, I've spent the last few years thinking about fun. And as a sociologist, you're more used to defining problems and thinking about the more dystopian aspects of life. But actually, there are some really amazing things about being a human, and there are some incredible things about being alive. And I just wanted to celebrate and study one aspect, one positively affective aspect of life. I've spent time developing a theoretical framework for trying to understand what distinguishes fun from other phenomena, and I'll explain why I thought that was important in a mo. But my initial interest in fun came from a confluence of circumstances. I was writing about the relationship between mental health and work at the same time as the UK government initiated a programme which became known as the National Wellbeing Programme. And in the National Wellbeing Programme, the government attempted to measure those things which were positively related to our well-being. So they were measuring economic wealth, physical health, levels of anxiety, even things like how networked you were with other people. One thing that was notably absent for me was any notion or concept of fun in the ways in which people were trying to measure well-being. So the implication of this, for me, was that well-being is predicated on many aspects of life, but fun isn't one of them. However, in my studies on work and employment, kind of occasions of fun were clearly iterated, were clearly said to me in interviews to break up the monotony of various jobs or to establish different ways of understanding a day. It was clearly important to people. So, this is what happens when you let a sociologist look at something as joyful, messy, and ethereal as fun, right? I've turned it into this, perhaps the least fun thing you will come across today. This is my idea of what fun looks like. And I'm going to pick out a couple of items. This schema, I should say, was developed from data that I gathered for a study on fun. So I interviewed or surveyed over 200 people, and from those testimonies and from literature, I devised this schema of fun. I should say that there is a literature which kind of touches on fun, but it is not big. And I was having to delve into the literature from the 1950s, ideas of fun morality from Martha Wolfenstein that you should, that there was a moral impetus to demonstrate how much fun you were, that you had to demonstrate that you were a fun guy or a fun gal for moral legitimacy. Donald Roy's stuff on psychological protection against monotony and boredom. So there are these kind of accounts in literature which say something about fun, but not a lot. So I did this study. There's also something about the history of the word, the etymology of the word fun, which is also interesting to note. It emerges in the 17th century and means low wit and is a term of mockery. By the 19th century, it's appropriated by wealthy people to describe poor people as stupid and untrustworthy. It then gets reappropriated by poor people to describe not doing what your boss is telling you to do. And it's from this point that more disruptive and resistant kind of flavor in fun emerges. And I would argue that it still carries on today. It still has that tenor, as opposed to things like pleasure, joy, or happiness. So all of these things meld together and provoke me to produce this. I'm going to pick out a couple of things which I think are core characteristics of fun and enable you to distinguish it from other things like pleasure, joy, and happiness. The first is temporality. Time is very important in fun. It tends to start in a moment and it finishes in a moment. Happiness and even joy are much more elastic in time. So you can imagine that you're just having a time, you're walking along the road and you bump into someone and you were going to go shopping and they say, let's go to the pub. And you think, yes, let's go to the pub. Suddenly you're opening yourself up to a different set of experiences than you were expecting. You can identify the moment at which you think I'm having fun. And then as you're getting up to leave the pub, you trip over and cut your knee or something and the fun clearly stops. You can locate it really clearly in time. Fun involves a deviation from the norm, and this often you can refer to as transgression, but it doesn't need to be a spectacular transgression. It doesn't need to be some great rule breaking. It can be something as simple as just breaking your routine. It's in that space that fun tends to happen. People need to be alleviated from their cares and their responsibilities at the moment at which you're having fun. So you can't really access fun if you're already concentrating on things which are worrying you. Other people are very important to the ways in which we experience and understand our fun. And whilst this is a bit of a contentious issue, I would still suggest that fun is a social phenomenon. And in the interviews that I did for the study of fun, only one person in over 200 identified a moment by themselves that they said that they were having fun. Other people absolutely dominated the fun that people were telling me about. It's got an interesting relationship to being distracted, on the one hand, distracted away from cares and worries, distracted away from what's normally going on around you, but you're also engrossed at the same time in the thing which you are taking fun in. So at the same time as you're distracted, you're engrossed. And so what I was thinking is, well, I've got this model, and then I had all this data, and what I was thinking is, right, well, I'll put the data through the model and simply see how people are framing this positive affective state that people understand as important to them. There was a lot in the data, but what I want to do here is concentrate on what happens between childhood and adulthood. In childhood, fun is referred to almost as though it's a right, in an idealized childhood. Whereas in adulthood, it tends to be referred to as a luxury. And when I asked people about childhood, I got some really lovely data. Here's some examples. An 11-year-old girl told me a couple of months ago at St. Answell's Park with my friends when it was raining, we hid under a tree and still ended up getting wet. And then we took off our socks and shoes and jumpers and made rain angels and got soaked to the skin, and then we ran home because we were shivering. A 9-year-old told me about dancing in the car. A 71-year-old former teacher said, I think about how me and my brother would ride our bikes around town in the country and things would just happen, like getting caught on the railway bridge and having to hang below the rails while the train passed over, or launching our corrugated iron boat and me being saved by my brother when I was sucked into quicksand. Adventure might sum it up. That's a 71-year-old retired school teacher. I want to be in that classroom. I mean, this woman was clearly had a different concept of risk than most people, and I really respect that. Good for her. Anyway, there was this lovely data in the testimonies of childhood. So I talked to children, but I also talked to adults about their experiences of childhood. When I coded the data, when I gathered the data together and looked for emergent themes, I really enjoyed coding the childhood data. Adventure was very important, and in fact, the 71-year-old teacher said that adventure was important to her. Darkness and adventure, naughtiness and adventure went hand in hand, and crucially for adventure, there were no grown-ups. Grown-ups were absent in the stories of adventure. This wasn't to say that other people weren't present, but what was interesting to me was in the childhood data, family was much more present than I had anticipated. I'd thought that it would mainly be friends and peers. But actually, even when people suggested they didn't have a particularly nice time with their family, they would still come up with occasions when asked, could you tell me about an occasion in childhood where you had fun, where it was a family holiday. Even though my family didn't really get on, I remember this one time in a caravan in Prestatyn and we had a wonderful time, that sort of thing. So family was very important. Friends and peers were important. Holidays were important, but the stories in the holidays were about roaming. There was a lot of stuff about roaming and there was a lot of freedom in the data. Related to that was nature. Lots and lots of the stories, the majority of the stories in childhood, the fun was had outdoors. And there was mention of trees, there were mention of water featured really heavily in the data. And I wondered about this, and I think it's because water, you can have great fun in water, but there aren't any implications. You can splash, but you can clear it up. The sea, there was loads of stories of the sea. Animals featured, as did imaginative play and building. Those were the core themes that emerged from the childhood data. The sorts of data gathered under the banner of childhood were joyful, messy, without inhibition. I also asked people about fun in adulthood. Something changes in our relationship to fun, and particularly in our relationship to what's acceptable and what's unacceptable in relation to our stage of life. The carefree fun of childhood is replaced by an altogether more inhibited set of themes. A number of people said they could not remember the last time they had fun in these interviews. Where they did identify fun by a country mile, the biggest theme was talking. Talking was the thing which was identified as, this is how as an adult I have fun. Interestingly, when predominantly those identifying as women would frame fun as the talking as chatting, those identifying as men would frame it as banter. Friends, partners, and strangers replaced family. There was barely any talk of family. Friends, partners, and strangers. And there's a clear sense in which fun appears to be organized in adulthood, where it isn't in childhood. The outdoors is mentioned, and it's mentioned in holidays, sporting activities, and travel. But all of those activities were with reference to a kind of organized sort of fun. So the holiday data was about, we went on a package holiday and I lay on a beach. There's that kind of freedom. It was much more about relaxation in those instances, but the freedom that was clearly expressed in the childhood data tended to be missing in the adult data. Tellingly, alcohol featured heavily in the adult data, and it's at this point I ought to mention that the data is not representative. It was gathered predominantly in the UK, so I'm not suggesting that this is universally the case, but I would say that the observation that the adults appear to be using social props to justify their fun is something that you can apply elsewhere. Inhibition is a key theme in the relationship then between the change from fun in childhood to fun in adulthood. It's clear to me that adults were using these social props to shed themselves of inhibitions. Alcohol is a social prop. So on the one hand, you are less inhibited when you are drunk, which then allows you to dance. Also, the amount of particularly young men that I've spoken to subsequently who said they won't dance unless they're holding a drink is really interesting. It's perfectly acceptable for children to dance, shout, run around, behave in an irreverent fashion. But it's not acceptable for adults to do the same unless under very specific circumstances or contexts. To take the example of dancing, many people I spoke to said they would only dance if they had a drink, but when pushed, they suggested it was the dancing that was the fun and not the alcohol. The alcohol is like a bridge to that experience. It's used as a means for signaling to others that it's acceptable to dance. Why is this important? Well, there's something sad to me about the need to explain carefree, joyful experiences as an adult with reference to things that have nothing to do with fun, but everything to do with justifying behaviors to others. It's as though in order to maintain the gravitas and seriousness of our adult selves, we have to make excuses for tapping into what many would consider our childish selves. Now, this is curious to me because these are not separate entities. The child I was is the adult I am, and many of the roots to fun and the nourishment that it provides have been with me for pretty much my entire life. For me, this ends up being about regulation and control. As with the example of school, fun is often transgressive. It stands staring at rules, wondering how they can be bent or broken. In all societies, regulation and control are important, and adults need to behave in particular ways to service particular economies. And fun presents an interesting challenge to those social impetus. There's been a fashion in the last 20 or 30 years for certain workplaces in the West to present themselves as fun places to be, as employers become alive to the perceived association between productivity, happiness, and fun. I'm not particularly fond of this trend. I don't like the idea that my fun is being defined and refined to fit particular corporate objectives. And if we think about how childhood fun becomes regulated, we see an engagement with rules and control that are frequently contradictory. At one extreme, we find the widely held belief that fun is an important pedagogic tool. Through having fun and playing, children tend to consolidate learning more effectively. And at the other extreme, fun is represented as something disruptive and in need of control. So as we move through adolescence, we find our fun increasingly regulated by spaces, regulated by time, and regulated by other people. And it's in adolescence that we become responsibilized. Teenagers have to adopt adult behavior and distance themselves from the behaviors which, valued in childhood, remain infantilized. As we move through adolescence, we're increasingly expected to demonstrate our social competence as adults. And so the association with a lack of seriousness, the frivolity and levity of fun, doesn't sit comfortably with the sorts of ways in which adulthood is defined through norms established in the life course. In the data for the study of fun, there was clear regret on behalf of adults that they could no longer access the fun they'd experienced in childhood. Hand in hand with inhibition comes responsibility, the byword for adulthood. Even the word carefree gives you a clear steer as to what should be avoided if you want the levity and joy implied in fun. Why does this happen? Well, I think the answer lies in the idea of fun as a disruptor. Thinking back to the earlier understanding of the word as being related to undermining the rules of the workplace, the desire of employers or educators to control fun becomes obvious. Fun is antithetical to a particular form of work ethic, to not doing what you were told, to being productive in ways that you yourself are not in control of. By co-opting the language of fun in education, in workplaces, in other systems of governance, the disruptive capacity of fun is lessened. And it's not just in institutional settings that fun is subject to regulation. I think that we have a fairly unimaginative conception of what it means to be an adult, and that one of its core defining characteristics is that it's different from childhood. And whilst it's indisputably the case that there must be key differences in our behaviours and responses to different stages of the life course, I think it's just sad that we leave behind one aspect of our child lives that we could easily recapture and that many people appear to mourn the loss of. So whilst fun is valued in both the experience of children and in our construction of ideal childhood, I would like to suggest that it become valued in our experiences as adults and in the construction of ideal adulthood. So I'd like to finish with some thoughts and perhaps some advice. First, why might child and adult fun be different? Well, fun is associated with less worry and not giving too much attention to the future. And this does not sit well with the idea of a productive self. There are more opportunities for fun moments as children, but these opportunities are structurally mediated. We make up the day. We make up what we do in what times. Structural mediation of our days is an inhibitor to freedom and autonomy. Fun is often starting something where you don't know how it will end, and adults are supposed to know what happens next. Crucially, though, fun is social glue. But as we grow older, accessing fun and making those connections become more difficult as we're taught to be more inhibited. I mean, who regularly talks to strangers? On the basis of this, what might we do to accentuate the clear relationship between fun and well-being? Well, we need to take care of it, as it's the door to an open, less inhibited part of ourselves. We should be imaginative about our routes to less inhibition. Fun provides an escape from anxiety, which is more important now than, or as important as it's ever been, in my view. It's a social phenomenon. It defends against loneliness. And we've tended to concentrate on the serious stuff in relation to well-being. Well, I'm saying let's concentrate on the less serious stuff. So to finish, fun is very important. It provides levity in the face of boredom or sadness. It's essential for feeling good. It fuels families and friendships, identities and happiness. It's something to be nurtured, cherished, enhanced, encouraged, recognized, and celebrated. And we'll experience it in our own ways, but always have it with others. And as long as there are rules, there will be people, I hope you people, playfully breaking them and having fun. Thank you very much.